Tony Benn. Tony, a great stalwart in our cause. Smoked for us on many platforms. Welcome back to our platform. Here's the microphone.
Right, thanks a lot. It's a very big issue, this, whatever view you take of it. It is a very, very big decision. And I'm very glad Keith Vaz, who's in favour of it, has come out in favour of the European enterprise, has come out in favour of this. And this idea that you're only in favour of democracy if you think you're going to win the argument is completely irrelevant. Now, can I just look back on my thoughts about this to explain the position that I'm in? I was born after the First World War, Second World War, the combination 110, 105 million people died. And there are people who say we can never fight again in Europe, and I agree with them 100%. I do not want the old nationalist Europe where you hate foreigners. So that's the argument for cooperation, and I take that view. I'm strongly in favour of cooperating with Europe. I was for a time, well, I campaigned for the referendum, but if you know this, I was in a minority of one on the National Executive and the Shadow Cabinet in 71. They didn't want a referendum, but in the end we got a referendum after we'd gone in and we lost it, and then I was on the Council of Ministers. And that was the most shattering experience I've ever been in my life, because I was the representative of Britain, and for 6 months I was the president of the Council of Energy Ministers. I wasn't allowed to submit a document. Only the Commission, who are bureaucrats, could submit a document. I could say yes or no, sort of a constitutional monarch, if you like. They controlled it. It met in secret. It made laws for Britain and everywhere else. It met in secret. And when I suggested we met in public, well, they nearly strangled me, because all their dirty little deals would have come out. And so the more I thought about this, and this is what it's about now, it is about democracy. And remember this, I was a member for 51 years. Members of Parliament are lent the powers of their constituents, and they have to return those powers undiminished at the end. It's not for members of Parliament to give away the powers that were lent to them, because they don't belong to members of Parliament, they belong to the electorate. And that is a critical matter. And now I say something else. I mean, we're primarily concerned with Britain, but it terrifies me that Germany didn't allow its own people to have a referendum on whether Germany should enter the European Union and have the treaty. And you know, before the war, Hitler wasn't exactly a democrat, and that practice of everything being decided at the top has been carried on to that. France had a referendum, defeated it, and now Sarkozy is trying to bypass it. And we live in a continent where increasingly power has gone to a group of people who are not elected, cannot be removed, and don't have to listen to us. I mean, Mandelson's a very powerful man. He wasn't even elected by the House of Commons. Blair appointed him under the royal prerogative. And Mandelson doesn't have to listen to us. With all the defects of our democracy, the reason governments listen to people is because you get your power from the people. I mean, being an MP, you know this, we're in a very unusual position. You're one employee and 60,000 employers. Everyone in your constituency employs you. The bus driver, the street sweeper, the home help, the policeman, they employ you. You can say what you like and always have done, but they can get rid of you. Because they can get rid of you, you have to listen to them. Mandelson doesn't have to listen to anybody. And it is the most bureaucratic, terrifying system in the world. And it's being imposed on us on the grounds it's tidying up. I must say, if tidying up involves tearing up the British Constitution, well, that's an interesting definition of tidying up. And I think this argument is an overwhelming argument. Now, there are other views of Europe. As I say, I don't want to go back to the old nationalism because of the bloodshed that took place. You could have a United States of Europe. You could have a president and a Congress and a House of Representatives. I mean, it would be wholly unwieldy, but you couldn't complain about it. After all, America isn't governed by a commission. Would you want this country governed by a commission? You could apply the European Constitution to Britain, and you'd find they were commissioners, and we don't even elect European members of Parliament. Do you realise that? You vote for the party. I can't write to an MEP and say, I won't vote for you again, to write back and say, Tony, you never voted for me in the first place. You voted for the party, and Blair decides who is the candidate. So the thing is absolutely undemocratic, and the effect of it, of course, is to create a lot of hostility to it, which means it won't work anyway. I'll tell you one thing. even if I believed in it, I think this system will end up with the breakup of the European Union like Yugoslavia. And I do not want that to happen either. I do not want to find we go back to hostility based on blaming the French or blaming the Italians or the Germans, because what's wrong is the system is wrong. And that is what we have to prevent. Now, how do you win the argument? Well, I mean, I listened to all this stuff this week about we've got to participate more, the manifesto is going to be put out to a referendum. Well, manifestos only last for a couple of years. But this decision is far more important than the next Labour manifesto, because it decides who governs, by what system. And there was an overwhelming argument, and Austin's put it absolutely right. Of course, the reason they don't want it, they wouldn't carry the day. You couldn't carry the day. And so this is the argument. Now, I'm not a great moderniser, if that means privatisation and all the rest of it, but I must say perhaps we should come up with the idea of modernising the European Union, by which I mean restoring power to the member states to cooperate. I'm not a nationalist. I mean, I don't know about you, I'm not in favour of a Scottish Parliament. If you are. Well, if there's a Scottish Parliament, they'll love it in Brussels because they'll be easier to control. If there's a Scottish Parliament, my mother was a Scot, I'm going to Scotland, I'm going to lead a campaign for the independence of the Kingdom of Fife against Edinburgh. I don't think nationalism is the answer to lack of democracy. The answer to lack of democracy is more democracy. And you know what, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, if this all goes through, Gordon Brown won't be the Prime Minister of Britain. He'll be the Mayor of the Greater British Authority, like Ken Livingstone. Well, it is. I mean, he won't have the power to do what he wants to do because those decisions will be taken elsewhere. And so it's the destruction of our domestic democracy, as well as a European arrangement that is undemocratic, that really worries me very, very much indeed. And I think we've got to think this out very, very carefully. But if we put a serious argument, everybody wants to cooperate with Europe. Of course they do. But cooperation on the basis that you put up proposals for harmonisation and the nation states decide which of those proposals they will adhere to. It'll be slower, it'll be more difficult, but by God, in the end, you'll be sure that every single harmonisation law has been consented to by the Parliament and can be repealed by succeeding Parliament. Now, one last point. I think what we're seeing in Europe is the beginning of a much, much bigger and more dangerous trend, the death of democracy generally. Leave aside for a moment Brussels. The IMF is not elected by anybody. World Trade Organization not elected anybody. Multinational corporations are more powerful than nation states. They're not elected by anybody. The central bank in Frankfurt's not elected by anybody. And funnily enough, one of the most successful countries in the world is Norway. Norway, why they're successful? I tell you why. They nationalised their oil. When I was Energy Minister, I managed to get hold of 20% of the North Sea oil, which Thatcher sold off. But Norway got the lot. And I was talking to a Swiss general the other day. I don't normally talk to generals, but he happened to come and have a chat to me. And they have the referendum as the basis of the principle. And they said, we're never going to go into the European Union. And you see, we don't have to go this way. This idea there's no alternative, as Mrs. Thatcher's phrase it, it's completely untrue. We have a choice. It's an important choice. And we're making a democratic argument that should appeal to people of all opinions, not just political opinions, but even those in favour of the new treaty should have the guts to say, not only am I in favour of it, but I'm in favour of it being introduced by the consent of the British people. So I think the challenge to democracy is a big one. We've seen a bit of it at this conference. Very interesting conference, this. No resolutions and no bookshop. You can't hear anybody's ideas. The only book you can read, by the way, is Alistair Campbell's book. It's being sold at the party headquarters. Funnily enough, when it was Alistair Campbell's book came out, I thought there'd be a Harry Potter queue outside the bookshop, so I got there early in case they all sold out. Nobody there, and I said to the girl, have you got the Blair years? And she said, how do you spell Blair? And that somehow said it all. Comrades, we've got a very important argument. Just like the Chartists and the suffragettes, we're about democracy. And democracy will be fatally damaged in Britain and in Europe if we go along with a system that has no firm democratic base. All I've got to say, I've tried not to be controversial at 82, I tried just to put simple arguments, but I fully support the Safeguards Committee, and John's reports are brilliant. I don't know if you collect them, but I've kept everyone he's ever written. I'm going to publish the collected works of John Mills one day, because it sets the whole case out so clearly. And Austin's Championship and others. Peter Shaw would have been on the platform if he'd been here today. So thank you for asking me. I'm sorry I've got 4 more fringes, but when you've retired, everyone rings you up and says, will you do a meeting? They seem to think you've got nothing to do. So I'm going to slip off to them, but thank you for asking me. And I think we have a good chance of winning this, because the public are with us, and you can't defy the public forever on really big issues. Thank you for listening.